will please come to order. Good morning. Today is our fourth hearing on the Biden administration's fiscal year 2025 budget request. And I'm happy to welcome Dr. Bertagnolli to testify for the first time in front of this committee as the director of the National Institutes for Health. As the granddaughter of an NIH-funded scientist myself, I understand what an important role biomedical research plays in treating and curing disease, bolstering our economic growth, and ensuring America is a global leader in innovation. I know my colleagues here today agree. I'm looking forward to working in a bipartisan manner again this year to develop a labor HHS bill that can pass the Senate, pass the House, and be signed into law by the President. That should be a bill that invests in NIH and the promise of finding life-saving cures and treatments for deadly diseases. But I want to be clear, our ability to do that depends upon agreeing to adequate top-line discretionary funding levels. Because of House Republicans' insistence on cutting funding for domestic programs, last year's labor HHS allocation was more than $2 billion less than in fiscal year 2023, the first such decrease in more than a decade. Even under those constraints, I was proud that we were able to fight back cuts to secure a $300 million increase for NIH in fiscal year 2024. But we should do better. Just like last year, more than a decade ago, Republicans insisted on cutting discretionary funding as the price of raising the debt limit. As a result, back in fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2015, funding for the labor HHS bill actually decreased in nominal terms. And as a result, NIH funding also decreased over that same period. Starting in fiscal year 2016, Congress finally decided overly restricted discretionary caps were stifling critical investments, including in NIH. So Congress began modestly increasing domestic spending as a result. From 2016 to fiscal year 2023, funding for labor HHS increased on average by $7.7 billion annually, a modest 3.3% per year. But that allowed this subcommittee to increase funding for NIH on average by $2.3 billion annually over the same period of time. Unfortunately, Republicans are now again insisting on cutting funding for domestic programs, including in labor HHS. And that's putting consistent, meaningful increases for NIH in peril. I'm deeply concerned that that will put us on a path of stagnating funding for NIH, just like what happened last time, as I described. Almost every senator here today will say that they strongly support NIH funding. That's easy. But if that's the case, as we have seen over the last decade, we need a workable top line that allows for a workable labor HHS allocation. And I hope we can return to the bipartisan consensus of just a few years ago and agree to adequate funding for labor HHS that allows meaningful, consistent increases for NIH. Alternatively, agreeing to the draconian cuts proposed by our House Republican colleagues on the other side of the Capitol, it would be devastating for biomedical research. It would set back years of progress made towards curing disease and weaken America's competitiveness, particularly against China. And we just can't let that happen. So today, I am happy to welcome Director Bertagnolli and her colleagues to our subcommittee to discuss the budget request for NIH. Director Bertagnolli, this budget highlights the need for continued investments along a wide range of bipartisan priorities that speaks to the breadth of research that you oversee as director of the NIH. I'm pleased to see the support for biomedical research and innovation to develop better diagnostics, improve treatment, and precision care for patients, including targeted investments for research on women's health and in support of the goal to cut the cancer death rate by at least 50% over the next 25 years. And at a time when we are seeing the spread of H5N1 bird flu across cattle herds and the detection of another human infection yesterday, it highlights the urgency of NIH work. I'm interested to hear from Dr. Maraza about the important work NIAID is funding to detect and monitor this virus so that we can limit its spread. The fiscal year 2025 budget requests includes $49.8 billion in total resources for NIH, including ARPA-H and mandatory Cures Act funding, an increase of $1.25 billion over fiscal year 2024. I want to point out, however, that most of this increase is to backfill decreased Cures Act funding that falls under this jurisdiction of the HELP Committee. Declining Cures Act funding, combined with very difficult discretionary spending caps, created a uniquely challenging situation for fiscal year 2024 and will again in fiscal year 2025. Outside of those increases in discretionary spending for Cures Act programs, which I'm happy to see maintained, I'm pleased to see increases for cancer research, mental health research, and neuroscience research. And during a time when women's health and reproductive rights are under attack in this country, I was pleased to see the budget proposes a $76 million increase for the Office of Research on Women's Health. But I was surprised to see that the budget does not call for any new resources for Alzheimer's disease research. I want to hear more about that and what impact that will have on the progress we have made in Alzheimer's disease research from Dr. Hodes. And I want to hear about how NIH is working to address our nation's mental health and substance use disorder crises. Tragically, overdose deaths remain stubbornly high. In 2022, nearly 108,000 people died of an overdose. In my state, there were 1,828 drug overdose deaths in 2022, surpassing the record set in 2021. Of those deaths, 1,464 involved opioids. I'd like to hear from Dr. Volkov about how NIDA and NIMH are working together to bring an end to this crisis. I also want to hear about how NIH is investing in the next generation of researchers, particularly in light of new data that reveal a decline in the number of U.S. postdoctoral scholars at NIH over the last 2 years. I want to know how you are supporting early-stage investigators, particularly women and those from diverse backgrounds. And finally, I want to hear about NIH's ongoing research on long COVID. It's been more than 3 years since Congress appropriated $1.2 billion for long COVID research, and NIH has moved slowly to enroll patients and has yet to deliver treatments for this debilitating disease. Dr. Gibbons, I want to know how you plan to leverage the Recover initiative to be more efficient and effective to finally move the needle for millions of Americans who continue to suffer. I look forward to your testimony and appreciate all of you being here today. And in a moment, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Capito for her opening remarks. Following Senator Capito's opening statement, we will hear from Director Bertagnolli, and after that, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. Senator Capito.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Baldwin. Thank all of you for being here. And Dr. Boltognoli, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here today, but also congratulations on your fairly new role as NIH Director. I also want to thank you, as you know, for coming to West Virginia in March to see firsthand all of the amazing things that we are doing at West Virginia University, including seeing the work that Dr. Rezai and his team are doing to combat Alzheimer's disease and addiction. As you witnessed, my home state of West Virginia is a rural state. We have some of the highest rates of health challenges in the country. A partnership with NIH is critical for us to make improvements. Dr. Volkoff, who has also visited West Virginia, and Dr. Hodes, who says he's coming. We just got to get the date, right? Dr. Rothmel and Dr. Marazzo, it's wonderful, and Dr. Gibbons, thank you for being here today to discuss the many important health issues facing our nation. Many of you, as I said, have visited or will visit, and I'm very grateful for that. This will be a challenging funding year, as Chair Baldwin aligned that out. But for me, biomedical research at NIH is a priority for me and has been for this long bicameral, bipartisan priorities as well. The budget proposes $49.8 billion in funding for NIH, including 21st Century Cures and ARPA-H. The budget also proposes an additional $1.5 billion in mandatory funding for the Cancer Moonshot. Last year, I was proud we were at least able to get an increase of $300 million in very tough headwinds in discretionary spending for NIH. NIH is not just a great research and biomedical research institution, it's also a driver of economic growth, funding more than $92.89 billion in national economic activity across the nation in 2023. My small state of West Virginia, NIH supports 759 jobs and $148 million in economic impact in 2023 alone. And this is in a state that we really don't see, too many don't see us as one of the areas for medical innovation, but we are proving the nation wrong every day. The NIH impacts every American in some way, and I hope to again work in a bipartisan way to fund our joint priorities, such as finding cures and treatments for cancer, Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and many other conditions that plague Americans. As I mentioned, Dr. Bartagnoli, I'll get it there someday, joined me with a name like Capito that gets mispronounced as Capito half the time. You'd think I would be better at this. I'm trying. She joined me at WVU and witnessed the innovative research, talented research's advancements that we are doing in West Virginia. Much of this has been made possible by the partnerships that have been fostered by NIH over the years. Researchers throughout our state are making significant contributions to biomedical research in areas ranging from cancer to Alzheimer's disease to substance use disorders. Unfortunately, West Virginia continues to rank above the national average, both in new cancer diagnoses and deaths. So I'm pleased that the budget devotes increases to finding cures and treatments for cancer. As a lead sponsor of the Childhood Cancer STAR Act, I look forward to hearing about your priorities and advancements to combat cancer and grow our clinical trial networks, especially among our children. I will continue to prioritize fostering NIH collaboration with smaller and more rural states. Last year, we were able to provide a modest increase for the NIH IDEA program. This program provides funding to 23 states, including mine, that historically received very little federal research funding. And I'm proud of the friendship and partnership with Dr. John Lorsch at NIH for his leadership. The IDEA program and the other NIH funding has been instrumental for Marshall University, WVU, and other institutions in the state in developing world-class research in neuroscience, cancer, stroke, vision, and addiction science. Dr. Bartagnoli was able to hear about West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute's new mobile unit named Maverick, purchased thanks to an NIH grant. Dr. Sally Hodder and her team will use this mobile unit to give individuals all over the state, we know access is the issue in rural states, the ability to participate in clinical trials for new treatments, and as a prime example of how NIH investments can directly affect people. I do want to take a moment, and the chair and I are on like-minded here, to express my disappointment that the proposed NIH budget does not devote new resources specifically for Alzheimer's disease research at NIH. I have personally seen close hand through both of my parents the devastating effects that Alzheimer's can have on the family, the patient, and the caregivers. Nearly 7 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's in our country, and the national cost of caring for those with Alzheimer's and other dementias is estimated to reach $360 billion this year. That's staggering. Alzheimer's and dementia-related research must remain a national priority. I'd also like to see more attention devoted to substance abuse. The National Institute on Drug Abuse receives only a nominal increase in this budget. Dr. Volkoff has visited my state, as I mentioned, and she's seen firsthand how West Virginia is in the crosshairs, and as we know, every state is in the crosshairs of opioid and addiction crisis. I would like to add my voice in agreement with the chair on the recovery program for those with long COVID, and I know we have many in the audience today. I know we're dealing with a tough funding situation this year, but investments in biomedical research are so important for the future of our country. Before I close, I would like to address Dr. Bertagnola again on something that we learned last week. I want to comment on something that is concerning. For years, the NIH and its leadership has taken the stance that NIH-funded gain-of-function research was not happening with EcoHealth Alliance or the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. This appears to be false based on Dr. Tabak's response to a House committee last week when asked if NIH funded gain-of-function research at Wuhan. Dr. Tabak answered, quote, "If you're speaking about the generic term, yes, we did," end quote. Last year, HHS debarred the Wuhan Institute from receiving federal grants for 10 years, and just last week suspended all funding for EcoHealth Alliance and plans to debar them too. I think both of those should have probably been done much sooner. The NIH has a credibility problem here when it comes to gain-of-function research, and I strongly encourage you and Dr. Marazzo to, in your new roles, to restore strength and research integrity and trust to the NIH in this area. Thank you very much. Look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Capito. And I will now introduce our witnesses. We have Dr. Monica Bertagnoli. She is the director of the National Institutes of Health. We have Dr. Gary Gibbons. He is the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Dr. Richard Hodis is the director of the National Institute on Aging. Dr. Jean Marazzo is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. W. Kimran Rathmel is the director of the National Cancer Institute. And Dr. Nora Volkoff is the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. We'll start with Director Bertagnoli. You may deliver your opening remarks.
Chair Baldwin, Ranking Member Capito, and distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor to testify before you today concerning our fiscal year 25 budget request. Let me start by sincerely thanking you for the funding you provided to NIH in fiscal year 24. Every state receives a share of NIH investment. Each year, NIH awards over 60,000 grants, supporting more than 300,000 researchers at more than 2,500 institutions. We're proud to continue to contribute to nationwide innovation in biomedical research and to support the next generation of researchers who will meet the challenges of the future. NIH is guided by the principle that our work is not finished when we deliver scientific discoveries. Our work is finished when all people are living long and healthy lives. Decades of sustained investment in fundamental science are producing exciting results. How can the brain be reprogrammed to relieve anxiety or depression or craving for harmful substances? How can we replace a defective gene, thereby achieving durable remission of a debilitating disease? How do we enlist the specific function of the immune response to eliminate an advanced cancer? Our laboratories are delivering answers to these questions and many more. But we still have work to do. Families across the country are facing high rates of maternal mortality, struggling to care for those suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and losing loved ones to substance use disorders. The 2025 President's budget requests support to address these critical needs, including the Cancer Moonshot, Brain Initiative, Women's Health Research Initiative, and funding to promote mental health, to overcome suffering from long COVID and related ME/CFS, and to achieve longer and healthier lives for people with Down syndrome. Our track record demonstrates that, with continued funding and support, NIH researchers will deliver progress toward understanding and overcoming these challenges. I call your attention to two overarching concerns. First, many are underrepresented in medical research, especially people who are older, uninsured, belong to minority groups, or live in rural locations. And second, for the wealth of data we now collect, we still lack comprehensive, diverse data from the clinical care environment that can power new artificial intelligence approaches to improve health. On behalf of the 27 institutes and centers of NIH, I present two new programs to address these important needs. First, to ensure that research discoveries benefit all who need them, we must partner with people across the entire nation, reaching them even, for instance, if they live in a rural location far from a major academic medical center. To do this, we will enlist primary care clinicians on the front lines to develop ways to overcome health challenges that matter to the communities they serve. Care providers practicing in underserved communities will be the main focus, supporting them so that their patients will contribute to knowledge generation and also benefit from research that allows people to receive better care. Next, consider how information technology is changing our world and how much more efficient and inclusive our research would be if we could better collect data to learn from everyone. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are revolutionizing what is possible for biomedical research and clinical care. But to realize the potential of new technologies, we need to invest more in a secure and sustainable data sharing infrastructure. By engaging government, industry, and academic partners, we will enable health innovation on a national scale, supporting secure researcher access to data along with advanced analytics and computational power. And we will incorporate what we have learned from projects such as All of Us to obtain people's permission to use their health data for research and deliver results back to them, inviting them to be our true partners in research. These efforts to reach people from all locations and walks of life will accelerate progress and ensure that no one is left out. When we ask people what they need and deliver results that benefit them, when we are transparent and clear and respect their wishes, we will earn trust. So, NIH-supported discoveries have benefited all of us, and we are poised to do so much more. Your continued support of our mission to help all people live longer and healthy lives is crucial. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bertagnoli. I am going to kick off a round of questions, and I want to begin with Dr. Marazzo. More than a decade ago, researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison studying avian flu, or H5N1, warned that only a few mutations in the virus would enable it to transmit to mammals. Today, H5N1 has infected 51 dairy cattle herds across 9 states. Just yesterday, a second human case of H5N1 infection was detected in Michigan. Fortunately, as far as we know, the virus has not spread to my home state of Wisconsin, but it has caused concern for dairy farmers in my state and across the country. I recently convened a roundtable with federal and state agency leaders and dairy stakeholders in Wisconsin on the current state of the disease and strategies for mitigating its impact on human and animal health. Scientists still don't know how the virus is spreading or how long cows remain infectious, and our roughly 100,000 farm workers are at the highest risk of infection. So, Dr. Marazzo, please tell me about NIAID's tracking of the spread of H5N1 or mutations in the virus and the work that you're doing to develop a vaccine against it.
Thank you for that question, Chair Baldwin. This is an incredibly important topic, and I do want to acknowledge the great work that our University of Wisconsin colleagues have done. In fact, they have been part of one of the networks that I want to tell you about. This is a pathogen that has been on our radar for a long time because when it does get into human hosts, we have seen a mortality of about 50%. So this is something we really do not want to happen. What we have been doing for more than 10 years is funding a group of investigators called the Centers for Excellence in Influenza Research and Response, of which your university is one. And what they do is to collect and characterize this virus in wildlife, including migratory birds, which has been, of course, a very big source of these viruses. And that's important because, as you mentioned, you do need to track the mutations that are occurring in the wild so that you can be prepared to prepare the vaccines and antivirals that you're going to need if those viruses get into human hosts. So really important network that has been doing incredible work. And that's been informing us even before this current outbreak. With regard to the current outbreak, the good news is that many of the viruses that they have been identifying are very similar, if not almost identical to the case in the humans, both humans that we know about. Although the sequencing hasn't been done on the human case we heard about yesterday, but we assume it's going to be the same one. So the good news is that we're really prepared to not only test the current vaccines that we have in the stockpile, but also to really develop specific vaccines. So I think we're in a very good place. We're also working closely with some of the other agencies that are involved in this, and continuing to develop monoclonal antibodies, vaccines, and antiviral drugs, all very much a part of our remit and very much engaged right now in doing this.
Thank you. Dr. Volkov, while recent CDC data shows a slight decrease from the prior year, overdose deaths still claimed more than 100,000 lives for the third year in a row. These deaths are largely attributable to illicit fentanyl. And a NIDA study published last week shows the availability of illicit fentanyl continues to skyrocket. 115 million illicit fentanyl pills were seized by law enforcement last year. We can and must do more to stop this epidemic and save lives. I know this is a bipartisan priority for members of this committee, including Senator Capito and myself. That's why we provided a $5 million increase for opioid research in the fiscal year 2024 Labor HHS bill. So, Dr. Volkov, 2 years ago, HHS launched a coordinated national strategy to prevent overdoses. What can you tell us about the Healing Communities study and what interventions it has found to be most effective at the local level?
Thanks very much for your question, and thanks for your interest on this very challenging issue posed by the overdose crisis. The Healing Community study aimed to actually empower the communities in order to give them the resources and the support necessary for them to respond to the local circumstances at which they find, because we see that the overdose crisis is very heterogeneous across the nation, and we wanted to learn from this community. So the Healing Community Studies empowers them, allowing them to get the data and to develop the interventions that are more likely to be beneficial. And as a result of that, we have learned strategies that then can be deployed to other states, because this was done just in 4 states, and now actually are expanding access to data that allows the communities to see whether their interventions are making a difference or not. And in the process, we've seen a significant expanded distribution of naloxone and a significant expanded recruitment of people into medications for opioid use disorder, and an improvement in the practices for treating patients with pain properly with opioids when they need it or using alternative treatments.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll stick with you, Dr. Volkov. because I know that you've seen and are well aware of some of the research that's going on with NIH at West Virginia University with Dr. Rezai on his use of ultrasound to potentially slow addiction and Alzheimer's, and I want to talk to Dr. Hodis about that as well. What do you think that that work, what kind of promise does that work have with ultrasound to decrease some kind of cravings? I know there's no one solution fits all here. That's the difficult part of what you deal with every single day. So what do you see in terms of on the horizon for treatment?
Yeah, you see me smiling.
Yes.
Actually, this is a perfect example where science is...
You need, we need your, yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying, you're seeing me smiling because this is a perfect example that you see where science has transformed the way that we can tackle problems, like in this case, addiction. And this is possible because of our understanding how the brain works and what are the circuits affected in addiction on the one side. And through brain technologies developed by brain to be able to manipulate them in a non-intensive way very selectively. And that's exactly what Dr. Rezai is doing, using low-intensity focused ultrasound to basically restructure the way that the nucleus accumbens, which is the area of the brain involved with reward, actually gets disrupted by drugs. Mm-hmm. And what he has shown, even though it's very pilot data, is quite dramatic. He sees that a dramatic reduction in craving and anxiety on people with severe substance use disorder. And this is an intervention that's not invasive, that requires 1 or 2 interventions and appears to have at least an effect that lasts 1 week, if not 4 weeks. So we are funding research to try to exploit it, how to maximize its utility so that others can take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite remarkable to watch, and I've watched it myself. Dr. Hodis is also doing the same. It's brain, and it's interesting how all of these things can kind of interconnect at some point. How I know you've had a long history of studying Alzheimer's, so what do you think about this as a potential breakthrough in combination with what we're seeing with some of the pharmaceuticals and other available, I don't know that they're full treatments, but at least improvements in how to handle Alzheimer's? Yes,
so very much just as you're reflecting, and as Dr. Volkow noted, it's gratifying when we see convergence of technologies and approaches. In this case, the progress in this past years in Alzheimer's treatment has been quite remarkable, with the first FDA approval of a drug, lecanemab, for treatment of mild cognitive impairment early stage. What we've learned from the series of both successful and unsuccessful trials is that the effect is very strongly related to the degree of decrease in amyloid that could be accomplished.
Right.
And what was shown in these studies in West Virginia was that the use of targeted ultrasound in combination with an antibody to amyloid increased the effect in decreasing amyloid in the brain. Preliminary data, which now will be followed up with promise for making more effective in combination the treatments that we have available.
Well, it couldn't be done without NIH and without the innovators that we have. I'd like to move over to the NCI designations and clinical trials. And I don't know who wants to answer this, Dr. Rothmel or Dr. Bartignola, but there are 14 states, including my state, that do not have an NCI-designated cancer center. You know, you've seen the statistics. Our cancer statistics in our state are very disappointing and devastating to us. It goes back to my rural area question. My understanding, anecdotally through the professionals that I've talked with, is that in order to get this designation, you have to have $10 million of repeating research into a center before you can become NCI designated. In some rural states that don't have the resources and other things, that becomes a big hill to climb. I'm suggesting here that have you thought about some kind of a carve out or some kind of a way for access for the more rural states to take into consideration the certain dynamics in a state like that, as opposed to some of these bigger medical centers that are around the other 36 states that have it. So I don't know who wants to.
Take that.
Okay.
Yeah, Senator Capito, thank you for the question. So first, the cancer centers is only one part of the portfolio,
right?
And we would love to have more cancer centers, and so I know we're working with several that are emerging and working toward becoming the comprehensiveness. But in terms of reaching out to rural America in particular, with delivering on the discoveries to get into the hands of patients, which is ultimately what we all want here. First, I'll say that the NCI has long had a dedication to this, but I grew up in Iowa.
right.
You know, I understand very much what it means to have great distance from wherever you are to a major medical center, and then was at Vanderbilt, where although we had Nashville, the surrounding area had very similar issues. So I'll tell you just a couple of things that we're doing to try to take that on. Beyond the cancer centers, we have 2,200 sites that do clinical trials around the nation. Our National Clinical Trials Network is something unique in the world in terms of a broad network for clinical research. I think we have over 100 clinical trials in West Virginia. And we also have the National Community Oncology Research Program, which is another way of engaging community oncologists, because that's really where most patients get their care.
Right.
But we know that it's not enough, and so we've engaged a group to work across agencies and with community centers to look at our capacity building opportunities. Absolutely, it's a huge priority for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Capito, and welcome to the NIH team. It was about 10 years ago when I met with Francis Collins at NIH, went through one of their spectacular tours, which I recommend to all my colleagues, and I said to him, I can remember as a member of the House when Arlen Specter and Tom Harkin and Congressman John Porter decided to double the budget of NIH. It seemed an impossible task. They achieved it. It made such a difference in that agency. Still, we feel the benefits today. And I asked Dr. Collins, what is it I can do, or we can do now? Doubling it is not realistic. What is realistic? He said 5% real growth each year. I'm going to pass out a chart here which shows what happened after that. I came in and engaged Roy Blunt, who deserves credit again and again for his leadership on this, and my seatmate, who will be here shortly, Senator Murray, as well as Lamar Alexander. And our effort was try to make sure that year after year we continue to give 5% real growth to the National Institutes of Health. This chart will show you that we did a pretty good job of it. The slope that heads on up there, the blue slope, I would attribute to the team that came together. The red or orange part of it that shows is the deficit, where we failed to reach the 5% real growth. I would just say two things. I commend to my colleagues the theory that this is national security. This is national defense. Ask the American people if it's worthy of their tax dollars. I'm not going to take a penny away from the Pentagon, but for God's sake, NIH is doing things which are going to save as many lives as anybody at work in the Pentagon, maybe more. So I encourage the creation of a new team. Senator Capito, you sound like, from your questions, you're deep into this subject, and that's a good thing. So I hope in the memory of Roy Blunt that you'll join the effort as we move forward. And I invite others to be part of it. And again, we count on Senator Murray now as chair of the full committee to move in that direction. Like my colleagues, I have some specific questions about specific maladies and illnesses which we've taken an interest in. This success story for the National Institutes of Health has had its ups and downs in given areas. Next week, 6,000 blue flags will be placed on the National Mall, each flag bearing the name of a grandparent, spouse, parent, child, neighbor, or friend battling ALS. One of those flags will bear the name of my friend and constituent, Brian Wallach, who was active in the White House under President Obama. His wife, Sandra Abravaya, a true courageous individual, used to work on my staff as a press secretary. And of course, they have two little daughters. They have been battling ALS for years with some limited success. And I use that word advisedly because I know that you hardly ever want to say that word around ALS. Dr. Collins called me at one point years ago and said, we've come to the conclusion that we're heading in the wrong direction in our research in ALS. We're just not coming up with anything after years and years of effort. What is the status of efforts today in research on ALS?
Thank you so much, Senator Durbin. And let me just say right out that this is a tragic, tragic disease, and we are approaching it with a great sense of urgency that it deserves. What has happened following, among other things, the Act for ALS, which has been really great for us, is a collaboration between NIH researchers and the people affected by this terrible disease. They worked with us to set strategic priorities for tackling the disease, and these goals encompass diagnosis, treatment, management, prevention, and cure. We have to use that word because that is what our goal is. And we're in implementation now. Let me give you specifics of implementation. There is a very active partnership with FDA's Critical Path Initiative, expanded access program for drugs that are experimental, which is certainly critical for hope for these individuals. A new Accelerating Medicines Partnership for ALS that is done under the Foundation for the NIH will be announced imminently. And then also some practical but critical things, data sharing, prognosis in the genetics of ALS, biomarker development, and more new trials.
Just have a few seconds left. The blood-brain barrier seems to be a topic which I hear about more and more in breakthroughs in medical research. Can you tell me in a few sentences what we're finding?
Well, we're finding that there are techniques. This barrier prevents drugs from getting into the brain where they need to work, and we are finding that certain techniques are able to open that barrier so that drugs we need to get in can pass through. The details don't matter, but I can tell you this is an incredibly active area of research to bring more therapies, more effective therapies to those affected by neurologic diseases.
My last comment, glioblastoma is an example. We've lost John McCain, Ted Kennedy, and Beau Biden to glioblastoma, and I'm hoping even at Northwestern University, where there's some research breakthroughs, that we can find a way to treat this malady in a more effective way. Thank you.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, our ranking member. And I certainly appreciate our panel for being here today. And I'm going to direct my question to Dr. Rathmel. The University of Mississippi, my state, is the only academic medical center, much like Senator Capito, and we are working to achieve our NCI designation, but we're not there yet. And UMMC does a fantastic job. First lung transplant, first heart transplant in the entire country in the early 60s, and I'm really proud of that. So we're working hard to get there, but we're not there yet. And my question is, as we work to get there, we're talking about the trials and treatments and being able to participate in that. And can you share your thoughts on, although we don't have that designation yet, bringing these trials and treatments to Mississippi and what that looks like, and if we're eligible for that, and how would that change lives in Mississippi?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for the question. So, as I said before, we do have multiple resources that we use to bring clinical trials in. The NCORE, the National Community Oncology Research Program, is actually very active in your state. This group, I'll expand a little bit on the group that I mentioned before that we're convening. Actually, one of the co-chairs of the group comes from Baptist Healthcare Center in Memphis, and so his group really sees a lot of patients in the Mississippi area. That group is, as I said, working across federal agencies, VA, Indian Health Service, CMS, American Cancer Society, where they're grassroots efforts to see how we can make clinical trials more accessible and more desired and more available. And then we're doing other things as well. Smaller centers can't necessarily have all of the staff that they need to run clinical trials, and so we've piloted a virtual clinical trials office, which has been really heralded as a different opportunity to take the clinical research nurse in virtual space into these places. I think that will democratize the ability to bring clinical trials a lot further. And that's part of what this group will be looking at.
Thank you for that, and I'm certainly going to ask for your commitment as well at UMMC to help us get there. But recently, your editorial that stressed the importance of clinical trials infrastructure to addressing and eliminating the inequities in the healthcare system, you highlighted that increasing community capacity to conduct cancer research is the key goal, and we sure hope that we're part of all of that. Will this plan involve getting granting mechanisms, and what impact would flat or declining budgets have such on the initiative to help us all get there?
Yes, I'm so glad we're clearly on the same page here, and we want to work with you to be able to do more of these things. The flat budget makes it tougher to make new granting initiatives, and we have to come up with new ways to be able to get these initiatives out there within the budget constraints that we have today. So that's where part of the Reinvigorated Cures Act would bolster our infrastructure for clinical trials. We're looking at a future where we think that clinical trials could be much more available to patients everywhere where they are, and that takes real infrastructure.
Thank you so much, and I have a little time left. So, Dr. Bergtonali, thank you for being here as well. And the NIH provides support to Mississippi through the Institutional Develop Award, the IDEA program. And we currently have 10 active IDEA awards totaling over $17 million. And as you know, the IDEA Networks of Biomedical Research Excellence fund statewide biomedical research developments, and which includes a network in Mississippi colleges and universities, and they are collaborating to increase this research infrastructure in my state. And this is made possible through the NIH commitment to that program and to expanding our national research capabilities. But I certainly encourage you to the NIH commitment to the IDEA program and the funding it provides to Mississippi and other states. How committed are you to ensuring that NIH allocates at least 1% of NIH funding to the IDEA program under your leadership?
So, Senator, I can't give a specific percent, but I can tell you this is truly among my highest priorities, to make sure that our research, which means our funding, is delivered and distributed through communities such as those that are served by the IDEA program, and even more so, not just the IDEA program alone. IDEA is capacity building, the ability to do research. What we're going to do now is bring the research grants in, the actual trials, the actual studies. So I think states like yours have done a great job with this funding to develop the capacity. Now we're going to put that capacity to work. And that is going to be really exciting and I think of great benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Next, I recognize the chair of our full committee, Chair Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Baldwin, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Thank you for the great work you do. You know, the fact of the matter is NIH is fighting some of our nation's most devastating adversaries: cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, opioid addiction, long COVID, to say nothing of rare diseases or pandemic threats. The life-saving work happening at NIH really shows that, as I've been reminding my colleagues, if we are serious about protecting our families here, then we need robust defense and non-defense spending. Unfortunately, the tough caps that are squeezing DOD are squeezing NIH. They are threatening to slow or derail breakthrough patients and families are desperately counting on today. That's why I have been very clear that we have to invest in non-defense and in defense. We need parity, and we need to make sure that investments like medical research, which saves countless lives, get their due as well. I'm proud to say we have a long history of bipartisan support for NIH. I've worked across the aisle many, many times to advance this important work with crucial funding increase. So I hope we can all come together to support this work again, along with many of our other crucial domestic priorities. With that, Dr. Burton, I wanted to start with you because I have a really important question I need to press you on. It's something I have been pressing on NIH for years about how the agency will make sure that federal dollars are not supporting researchers who create a hostile work environment for colleagues and students. We have seen NIH fall short when it comes to holding grantees accountable and complicit as institutions pass the harasser. We simply can't afford to have this agency's potential limited and its workers harmed by sexual harassment, discrimination, or bullying in the workplace. NIH is in a position to set a standard for a safe work environment in the biomedical research field. Under your leadership now, talk to us about what steps you are taking to make clear to institutions and your grantees that these behaviors will not be accepted and will result in the loss of federal funding.
Thank you so much, Chair Murray. And first of all, abusive behavior of any type, sexual abuse, harassing, bullying, any type is absolutely not to be tolerated anywhere. And we really thank you for your advocacy and championing this really important issue. So, specifics. First of all, thank you for your support in giving us the authorities to require that institutions that we fund must report to us anyone who has been found to be to exhibit this behavior, has a real finding of this behavior, and when that happens, their funding is withdrawn. That is a solid and important step forward that you provided us with. However, we still have more work to do, and we need your help. And so I really look forward to working you on that. And I'll just say it is still possible to pass the harasser if someone has been accused but has not really had a finding. It is possible for them to then move and get a new job and for us not to know what the results have been. Let me tell you, we've been trying to combat this as well by having an anonymous tip line, and we do get and follow up on everything we get with anonymous tip lines. But we can work better to close this one remaining.
Does it need a legislative solution, or do you have the capacity?
I think we need to work with you. I think we don't. I would like to work with you on that because I'm not sure I exactly know the answer. We've been exploring it, and I think maybe we could have a discussion and figure out the best way. So thank you.
Okay, let's follow up on that.
Yep.
I also want to talk about the fact that women are half the population. You well know that. Yet we are not near where we need to be when it comes to federal investment in women's health research. I strongly support the administration's efforts to tackle this problem head-on, including the executive order that President Biden signed in March to better prioritize investments in women's health across the federal research portfolio. This is really a needed step to make sure women's health is better understood so women can get quality health care at every stage. There are significant gaps in what we know about diseases and conditions that impact women, and a lack of treatments available even for things as universal as menopause. Talk to us about what NIH is doing to advance women's health research, including for conditions like menopause that are so common and yet so misunderstood and overlooked.
Yes, thank you. So NIH has a long-time commitment to women's health in many ways. I'll just call your attention to the Framingham study. 75 years, deep understanding of women's cardiovascular health, 50% women for all of those 75 years. And we've gained a lot of knowledge over that. Women's health study, research across all of our institutes and centers address women's health. However, we absolutely can do more. The new initiative now gives us an opportunity to address current challenges that are really important to women. You've already illustrated a few. Maternal health, the vulnerable time, mental health, postpartum depression, so many areas there that deserve more attention. Alzheimer's disease, which has an increased risk in women. Yeah. Mental health overall, the menopause transition, normal time of life, but the change in hormones can be incredibly disruptive. And there's also long-term health effects, bone health, et cetera, that we still haven't really developed the treatments and approaches that we need. Although we've made some progress, we can do more. And then finally, what's our approach? We are taking Instead of a bit-by-bit approach, we want to take a lifespan approach to women's health, a much more comprehensive and lifespan approach that coordinates across all our institutes and centers.
Well, I appreciate your attention to that, and I think I speak on behalf of many of us that we really want to see what we can do to help make sure NIH is really focusing on it. I mentioned menopause, working with a number of women senators on making sure we have the research and knowledge and coordinate what we're doing here and have a better focus. I think it was Senator Murkowski who said to us if men went through menopause, we'd have an institute at NIH. We're not asking for that. We're just asking to make sure we really focus on it. So I appreciate your response.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to forego an opening statement because I have so many questions that I want to ask. And they really fall in four areas: Alzheimer's disease, long COVID, tick-borne illnesses, and also diabetes. So, Dr. Hodes, we've talked so much over the years, and this committee has been very generous in funding Alzheimer's research in the last 5 years. And I would like to hear from you. Have we made any progress as a result of that funding?
Yes, well, Senator, thank you for the support we've had from Congress, which has been enormously important and has yielded important results. In the past year, for example, we saw FDA approval of the first drug, lecanemab, which targets the underlying process of Alzheimer's. In terms of prevention, another important area, we've seen studies reporting the effect of repairing hearing deficits with hearing aids in those at high risk for Alzheimer's, producing something like a 50% decrease in cognitive decline in that population. Early studies, but multiple of them, have pointed to the possible role of multivitamins in reducing cognitive decline, as well as targeted coaching to address the individual risk factors. Biomarkers, for the first time, giving us an opportunity to test by imaging, but also by blood biomarkers, the various components, biochemically, molecularly, of what contributes to Alzheimer's. So with all its successes, some of those of which I've summarized this past years, where we are now is an understanding that Alzheimer's is a complex disease, meaning multiple pathways that can occur in an individual and differ across individuals. But most importantly, we now have increasingly the ability to monitor this with biomarkers, with studies that will identify the best treatment for individuals. A growing number of unique targets now in early stage clinical trials, which we see as our next generation, both drugs and lifestyle interventions too. So I think we've had great advance, and the work is only partially there. With the increasing understanding we have of the disease, targeting diverse approaches in these future years, I think, is enormously promising.
Thank you very much. I'm encouraged as well. And I think we're going to find out that Alzheimer's is a multifactorial disease and that lifestyle factors play a role. Inflammation, I think we're going to find, is important, as well as the amyloid plaque that we focused on for so many years. Dr. Marazzo, HHS recently released the National Public Health Strategy to prevent and control vector-borne diseases in people. This was required as part of the Kay Hagan Tick Act, which I authored with Senator Murray and others, and it builds on the NIH strategic plan for tick-borne illnesses. This is increasingly a problem in the state of Maine. 20 years ago, we didn't have ticks in Maine that transmitted these kinds of diseases like Lyme disease. Increasingly, it's all over the state of Maine. They're all over the United States. And it creates real problems. Maine had a record high number of Lyme disease cases in 2023, and as ticks continue to expand, those cases are likely to increase. I was pleased to see the specific goal of reducing the number of Lyme disease cases by 25% by the year 2035. Could you briefly update us on the progress made in Lyme and tick-borne disease diagnostics, treatments, and potential vaccines? Because one problem is there's been a real dispute in the medical community on how to treat Lyme disease.
Senator Collins, as someone who did my residency in Connecticut and worked in Old Lyme for a summer, where I think I saw every manifestation of Lyme disease, and recently coming from Alabama, where we saw tons of tick-borne illness, I could not resonate. Your comments could not resonate with me more. It's a really challenging infection, and you highlight the fact that we still, 25 years after, or however many, we still don't even have a really good diagnostic test that we can use for it. The serology is very frustrating. It leads to a lot of misinterpretation. So let me just say that we released our strategic plan, as you know, for tick-borne disease in 2019, and the support from this committee in this area has been critical in advancing advances for both the basic, the diagnostic, and the vaccine and the treatment areas. So in the basic area, one of the more exciting things is that we finished with both intramural and extramural scientists sequencing the Ixodes scapularis genome, which is very exciting because you can now go in and be more specific about genetic targets to try to develop some of these vaccines and figure out what are the antigenic components, what's stimulating this immune response that probably, frankly, informs post-treatment syndrome, what was previously called chronic Lyme disease, but is clearly a post-treatment inflammatory syndrome. I'll jump ahead to that and just note that in 2021, I think we actually had a proposal out for work specifically on post-treatment conditions and awarded 7 big grants to look at that, to try to figure out, is that pathogen really persisting in these areas and how can we best address it? With the diagnosis, we're really looking carefully at a number of new serology approaches, some point-of-care diagnostics, which would help people a lot in the field, especially since people come to emergency rooms in the summer with these infections all the time. And then the last thing I'll mention is the vaccines. We have a pretty successful vaccine for dogs, right? There is a canine vaccine. We are figuring out why that vaccine is actually working, and we're trying to learn from that analogy to develop and refine the approaches to human vaccines, which has been really challenging. I'll stop there. There's more, but I'll stop there.
Madam Chair, I would ask that I be able to submit my question on diabetes. I'm concerned about the cut that is in the budget and surprised to see that, and on long COVID as well. The Recover initiative's been very controversial. The Maine Medical Center, I'm proud to say, is involved in the research, but I'll submit
Without
those for the
objection
record.
and any opening statement you wish
Thank
to
you.
submit. At the end, I will indicate the timeline we need for questions for the record, but thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to all of you for your good work. This is, I think I speak for most of us when we say this is one of our favorite hearings. It gives us the most hope about the future. Dr. Bertagnolli, I wanted to start with something close to home for me. With the support of this subcommittee, we secured $4 million last year to launch NIH's first ever Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Health Research Office. Can you tell me, our worry is that this is going to take 17 months to stand up, so can you reassure me that this thing is going to get stood up quickly? I know I'm in no position to hector you for it not already being up, but could you please tell me, could you please reassure us that this is going to happen quickly?
Absolutely, and we have an Office of Research in Tribal Health, and this will fall right into a very active program to do much more to care and engage and research our Indigenous peoples.
Great. Dr. Volkow, my Stop Pain Act was enacted 8 years ago, and since then NIH has funded hundreds of millions of dollars in pain management research. What have we learned in the last several years about chronic pain treatment?
And thanks very much for the budget, because it has actually energized the whole science infrastructure necessary to bring treatments that are effective for patients that are suffering from pain. Pain is devastating, it's very, very prevalent, but it has been neglected. And as a result of that, many people with pain ended up getting drugs that were very dangerous, which of course contributed tremendously to the overdose crisis. So thanks to the resources that have come from, in part, through the HEAL initiative, we've been able to advance several clinical trials and to actually uncover new treatments for pain that are not addictive and that are effective, completely new molecular targets. The resources have also enabled us to understand how multi-pronged approaches can be used to manage pain on people with chronic pain conditions, and two other areas that we have never been able to investigate. So
Two quick questions. What do you mean by multi-pronged?
Multi-pronged, that is not just based on a medication, that it actually engages behavioral interventions and cognitive interventions to help the person live with the pain, and like meditation, for example.
So how much of this is sort of, I'm not sure I'm using the right terminology here, how much of this is jumping the fence and getting into CMS and, you know, the private healthcare sector? That's the question I have, is that it does seem like over the last 3 to 5 years, a lot of important discoveries that are not so, you know, they're not merely suggestive. Like, we think we know some things now about pain management, but it doesn't seem to me that in its application in the healthcare context that they've woken up to this new treatment modality.
And that's why it's so important that in all of these projects, we work closely with CMS so that we can ask them the question, what is it necessary for us to show with the science that will lead to its reimbursement? So we work very closely, and for example, acupuncture is a perfect example of a partnership that's being developed to, if it shows effectiveness, you want to be able to provide it to patients and be reimbursed as a physician.
So you're not overly concerned that these are just two separate agencies that only talk when necessary?
No, there is an active, very proactive way, a sort of interest and motivation to commit ourselves to make collaborations across agencies, because otherwise the science doesn't go into the patients. It stays in the journals or in the laboratories.
This is what I worry about. Yes. So it's time for my annual question about psychedelic research. You know, I am cautiously optimistic about the revived research on psychedelics, and I think that part of what we have to do as a committee, but also as a Congress, is to draw distinctions around drug policy and a kind of move towards liberalization of drug policy for other reasons, for maybe libertarian reasons, for criminal justice reasons, and the question of whether or not some of these things that are used recreationally and sometimes abused are medicine. That is a separate conversation. I am personally for drug liberalization. I am also a son of a principal investigator, and I'm not prepared to call this medicine until all of you do the adequate research. So where are we with psychedelic research? And particularly, there's a bunch of accumulated data that seems to indicate that that this needs supervision, and the application of the administration of the drug has to be combined with talk therapy and supervision. So can you talk through how you see this?
You are absolutely correct. I mean, this is an area of tremendous excitement, from the very pharmacology to actually understanding how to optimally use it on patients. Because the data is starting to translate in evidence that it could be beneficial, what has happened is that clinicians are ahead of actually where the data is. So it's being offered to a wide variety of patients without sufficient evidence, including the question that you ask: how do you optimally give it without producing risk and ensuring that you're having long-term effects? And that's where we need to understand how the context at which you are giving the psychedelic drug is going to influence your therapeutic response. It's crucial. But like anything else, what people get excited, they want to start sort of believing a little bit in fairy tales. It's a magic. It's not a magic. It's a very promising, but we need to do much more research.
Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. Dr. Hodes, I was very interested in your answer to Senator Collins' question about the state of research regarding Alzheimer's. Let me ask an additional question. What's the latest in the research? What does the research show in regard to the connection between Alzheimer's and Down syndrome? Is that connection still viable, and are we learning something about both at the same time?
Yes, it's a very important connection between two very important conditions that we need to address. And as many may know, individuals with Down syndrome, likely related to the fact they have an extra copy of chromosome 21, have as they age. And the good news is, of course, that those living with Down syndrome now age into older adulthood at a very high proportion develop Alzheimer's disease. And there's been an extremely active program designed to study this, a network of longitudinal studies looking at biomarkers to understand how disease progresses in Down syndrome, and establish a network for clinical trials. And clinical trials are already in progress. For example, looking at the effect of a so-called GM-CSF. It's a growth factor, a granulocyte monocyte growth factor, as therapy in those with Down syndrome, preventive therapy, as well as behavioral exercise intervention. So we're working all the way from the basic science, connecting the trisomy of Down syndrome and the relationship to the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's, through clinical trials infrastructure and active clinical trials.
What would be the outcome if this connection is determined? What would change in the way that we would then address the issue of Down syndrome?
Well, certainly as Down syndrome relates to risk of Alzheimer's disease, this becomes similar to the rare but tragic early onset autosomal dominant Alzheimer's and other aspects where we know with high probability that individuals will develop Alzheimer's. We know that years in advance. And importantly, now that we have biomarkers to track the presence of disease early, allows us to intervene early in these populations to prevent.
Thank you. My following questions really are about process, mostly data. This could be to Dr. Hodes or to you, Dr. Bertagnoli. With all the data that's now available in many instances, but related to Alzheimer's, electronic health records, diagnostic tests, clinical treatment results, insurance claims, medical images, is there a way now that NIA can harness that data to uncover new insights and patterns that we can't see through individual research projects? Maybe that's my question. Is that being done?
I can be as you wish. I can begin, and then certainly Dr. Bertagnoli can amplify upon it, because you're absolutely right. Real-world data of the kinds that you mentioned are critically important to our fully understanding in an inclusive way what goes on with the health of the population, the way to maximize it. There have been some very important real-world data studies already carried out around Alzheimer's disease. And importantly, I would say that now the promise more than ever is for us to leverage these real-world data initiatives in the context of the large data initiatives, NIH-wide, federal agency-wide, that I think Dr. Bertagnoli can comment upon.
Doctor, that's really was going to be my
So,
question.
yeah,
How do we expand that?
I'll be quick. The data we use has got to be good enough that we can make life-altering decisions based on it. Right now, our real-world data is not of that level of accuracy, frankly. We are working really hard with FDA and with partners across all of HHS to convert our current ability to gather real-world data into one where we really can harness it appropriately, use it with new analytics like artificial intelligence to make life-altering decisions. Right now, it tends to be more hypothesis generating than testing, and we're going to fix that.
And the issue is not sufficient data, it's determining how to harness that data to get it in a form that it's valuable?
It's not necessarily efficient, it's the accuracy and the interoperability. You know, you got to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges, and, you know, some issues with how the messy data is in the clinical environment that can really lead to mistakes if
Thank
it's
you
not
for
done
using
properly.
a scientific
Thank
term
you.
that I understand, apples and oranges.
Thank you.
Finally, just maybe make a statement because of the shortage of time. I raised this in last year's or previous year's hearings with Dr. Tabak. ARPA-A, at one point in time, the funding of ARPA-A was at the expense of more traditional and clinical research at NCI. I hope that that's not a pattern. I assume that you will say that it depends on how much money you have, but I want to make certain that you are prioritizing NCI competitive cancer grants with FY25 funding. Dr. Bertagnoli.
So absolutely we are, and our relationship with ARPA-H is that we have our team members meet routinely to review what's happening in our sister agency and make sure that there is no redundancy, and in any way we can amplify, we do so.
That question was also directed to you, Dr. Rathmel.
But that's what I would say as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Bertagnoli, I'm directing these comments to you because you, of course, are the director of the NIH, but I could also direct them to each member of this distinguished panel. Let me state a few things that I think most fair-minded people would agree are facts. The National Institutes of Health, or more to the point, the men and women there, are one of the most extraordinary collections of minds in the world, maybe in all of human history. Your work, their work, has saved billions of lives. Their work, your work, has improved the quality of life for billions of people, not just in America, but worldwide. Additional fact, the National Institutes of Health is part of, at least in America, but I think the world as well, is part of the institution of public health. Another fact, in my judgment, as a result of the pandemic, the institution of public health, at least in America, and I think in some respects throughout the world, has been tarnished. And that's dangerous. That's very dangerous for America, for the world, if we have another public health crisis. I don't care to partake in who's at fault for that, or depending upon your perspective, who receives the credit for that. I'd like to suggest that we do something about it and that we learn from it. And I think the NIH is the perfect group of men and women with the requisite credibility to do that. Now, here are my suggestions. Number one, the NIH needs to clear the air on gain-of-function research. I would gently suggest that you could do it in a symposium. You could do it at an extended press conference with some of your bright minds making presentations. Be technical, but also speak directly to the American people in a way they can understand. Tell them what gain-of-function research is. Tell them how it is funded. Tell them what research projects the American taxpayers are funding. Tell them what, if any, America's involvement was with the gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. Tell them the benefits of gain-of-function research. Explain to them the risks. And be transparent. That needs to be done. And I think the NIH could lead it. Number two, at a different symposium or extended press conference, I would like to see the NIH take the lead in speaking to the world and to the American people about what we learned from the pandemic. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Here's why we got it wrong. Here's why we got it right. Here's how we saved lives. Here's how we could have saved more lives if we'd known then what we know now. The American people, they don't read Aristotle every day, but they're too busy earning a living, but they get it. You know, hindsight is wonderful. I think if you would consider doing those two things, we could remove some of the tarnish on the institution of public health in America. And I'll conclude with this point. I know there are risks here. And I know some of you are thinking, you know, what planet did Kennedy just parachute in from? Why do I want to get mixed up in this political hot mess? Because it's important. And it's not going away, folks. Neither one of those topics is going away. So I would gently suggest you put those extraordinary minds to work and consider doing those two things.
So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, Senator.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Vice Chairwoman. Appreciate you holding this hearing today, and thank each and every one of you for appearing before this subcommittee. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to you, Dr. Bertoloni. Is that right, Bertoloni? No? Try again? How do you say it properly? Not that I'm going to be able to do it, but Burton, oh gosh, yeah. The Alabama in me, I love it. Okay, good. I'm going to say Madam Director. How about we do that? Thank you so much for visiting Alabama this year. I am deeply grateful for your time and letting you come and visit with the incredible men and women that work there, see the work that's being done, figuring out how we can partner to continue to change lives for the better. Really, really appreciate it. And then also, and here we're going to have another challenge with how to say your name. Is it Mura? How do you? Yes. How do you?
Marazzo.
Jeez Louise. We are very proud, obviously, you having been at UAB and to see you in this job now. You obviously know what a special place UAB is, the tremendous work that is done there, and look forward to working with you in your new position. As you both know, in Alabama, over a third of our 67 counties are classified as maternity care deserts, areas without access to birthing facilities or maternity care providers. Last fall, 3 more Alabama hospitals announced closures of their labor and delivery departments, leaving both Shelby County and Monroe County without access to labor and delivery services. Additionally, Alabama has the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation. I am of the mindset, as I believe probably the men and women sitting at that table are as well, this is a crisis we should be able to fix. If you look back to 2019, NIH launched the Implementing a Maternal Health and Pregnancy Outcomes Vision for Everyone, the IMPROVE initiative. Madam Director, could you speak to the importance of this program and why the NIH felt so strongly that standing up the IMPROVE initiative was necessary, even without a sustained funding source?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Senator. You know, pregnancy-related complications related in the deaths of about 1,200 women in 2021. We're still waiting to see the figures coming in for the last couple of years, but it was just an enormous jump. And with much higher rates in Black women, which is also terrible. And so we're really, IMPROVE is one of many efforts, a really important one, but one of many we are looking to tackle this problem because it's multifactorial. It's mental health, so our
Yes.
Institute of Mental Health plays
Yes.
a role. It is also, to a certain degree, associated with substance use disorder as well, which we know, all
of these things
intersect.
together. And that's why it is so critically important. I just want to say thank you. Improving health care for women before, during, after pregnancy is truly vital. And I really am thankful for your leadership in this space. And I want you to know that I want to continue to partner. As you mentioned, though, obviously this research funding is so important, but yet this research is so important, but really lacks a sustainable funding source. And so last month, I was proud to partner with Senator LaFonza Butler from California on the NIH Improve Act, which would authorize in statute and provide consistent funding for this initiative. And so I just want to thank all of you and the NIH staff for providing your offices to help us with technical assistance on this, to make sure that we could get this important bill out there. I am committed to continuing to work with Senator Butler to finding a way to getting this passed into law. As you mentioned, not only is Alabama the highest maternal mortality, it disproportionately affects the Black community, and we need answers, and we need them now. So we're going to keep working on that to help with, to help with America's maternal mortality crisis. And I want to say, I know I'm almost out of time. 2 quick questions. When it comes to CRs, which is what we end up seeing happen here, unfortunately, and I want to commend Chairwoman Murray. I want to commend Vice Chair Collins. This committee did its work last year. We finished in July 27th, all 12 bills out of committee. Unfortunately, we did not get those to the president's desk until 236 days later, 174 days into the fiscal year. Can you speak very quickly about what a CR does to your agency? Oh, look at this. I get a reaction from the whole crowd. And can you just speak very quickly to that?
I'm sure we're the same as all of government when we don't know exactly what anyone knows this. If you don't know how much you have to spend, it's very hard to plan and make all of the strategic decisions we need to make that don't come at the very end of the year. We do the best we can and are certainly grateful for our funding, but it is challenging.
Madam Chairwoman, would you allow me to ask one more question? Thank you so much. Just last question. In your visit to Alabama, you were able to see some of the research that we are doing there, and how our community, our diverse population in Alabama, is really a great place for clinical trials. Could you just speak to that very quickly as to why you feel like those things match up so well?
So it is absolutely critical that we serve our populations that are having so many of these extraordinary needs that all intersect, that have to do with community in a very effective way with our clinical trials infrastructure. And so that is why we are launching a new clinical trials network devoted toward primary care to do exactly that, to get into the communities and doctors and clinicians on the front line, like the ones that we were able to visit in Alabama and in West Virginia and in other parts of the nation. And we're excited about this. It will be all of NIH effort to work with these communities to get the research that they need.
Thank you. Senator Capito and I each have a couple of remaining questions, so we're going to start a second round, hopefully quickly. Dr. Bertagnolli, new data from the National Science Foundation reveals the largest drop in the number of postdoctoral scholars at academic institutions in over 40 years. Employment indicators suggest that life science PhDs are choosing to pursue careers in industry instead. In order for America to out-innovate the rest of the world, we must invest in the next generation of researchers. I was proud to author the Next Generation Researchers Act with my colleague, Senator Collins, to improve opportunities for new and early-stage researchers. Since this bill was signed into law as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, NIH has increased funding for early-stage investigators by 63%. I was pleased to see the NIH recent plan to increase the minimum postdoctoral salary by 8%, raising it to $61,008 per year, and provide an additional child care benefit. This is a major step in the right direction, but it falls short of the $70,000 minimum salary that your advisory committee recommended. So, Dr. Bertagnolli, how is NIH tracking the impact of the stipend increase? And why aren't cost of living adjustments part of that equation?
So thank you for that. And, I will say that this discussion, how do we better support our young, the next generation, the ones who are going to make, transform the world, that discussion happens every single week in our meetings across all of our NIH directors. We need to support them on so many levels. You hit briefly on a increase in stipend for postdocs that came out of a working group of the advisory committee to the director. Many other parts of that working group we are responding to. I think you also alluded to why haven't we gone farther, faster, and farther, faster. We were left with a challenge of, do we fund more researchers at a lower level, or do we fund smaller numbers at the full level that the committee asked us to do? It was an economic calculation we did. We have made a declaration that as funding allows, we will increase it to the full $70,000 a year. That was advised by the committee over the next, hopefully, 3 years. And then finally, you also talked about the early stage investigator support. We do have special review criteria for early stage investigators. They get less stringent funding rate. So we really actively encourage, and we put out a challenge every year across all of our institutes and centers to achieve at least it used to be 1,100 new early stage investigators a year. Yeah, last year we made 1,600, and I'm optimistic we'll get that this year as well.
Thank you. Dr. Gibbons, an estimated 20 million Americans continue to suffer with, the long-term effects of COVID-19. More than 3 years have passed since Congress appropriated $1.2 billion to the NIH for long COVID research. NIH has moved slowly to enroll patients in clinical trials, and there is still 0 FDA-approved treatments for long COVID. Critics of the Recover initiative fear that it may not deliver any meaningful treatments. Getting this right has massive ramifications because it will dictate how doctors across the country treat their patients and impact people's ability to access work accommodations, disability benefits, and more. So, Dr. Gibbons, why has the pace of research been so slow, and what can you tell us about the status of clinical trials for long COVID?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator. As you know, long COVID is a debilitating disorder, inflicting great suffering, and affects nearly every organ system of the body, and involves, quite frankly, the missionaries of many of our institutes. And in that regard, let me turn first to our NIH Director, Dr. Bertinelli, for addressing your question.
Yes, Dr. Gibbons, I thank you, and Chair Baldwin, I am very pleased to speak to this as the NIH director, really to emphasize that this is really considered as a full NIH activity. Long COVID and the similar condition, myalgic encephalomyelitis, are terrible diseases. We must find better ways to treat and actually cure, restore the lives of these people who are affected by this terrible, and the increase related from this new disease, COVID, SARS-CoV-2, is just very tragic. So what's already been accomplished, I'll be very brief there. What has been accomplished is to understand a new disease that dropped on us that we didn't understand. 15,000 people with biospecimens, their electronic health record data, have allowed us to do the following: 5 platform clinical trial structures focused on what people need us to fix: autonomic dysfunction, cognitive, the brain fog, the cognitive challenges, fatigue and exercise tolerance, sleep disturbances, and viral persistence. So targeting those 5 key, really disruptive areas. We now are, and fully admit we are not where we want to be in terms of a rapid, nimble clinical trials enterprise that's testing promising treatments very quickly. That is our focus right now, moving forward to do that. And finally, we have launched 8 trials. New ones are pending, but as I said, we have clinically characterized platforms. We are ready to go into action and accelerate, approaching this great sense of urgency. And the last thing I want to say about long COVID and ME/CFS, we are so grateful for our partnership with the people that are affected by this. They have taught us over the last 2 years what we needed to do. Now we just need to deliver for them.
Yeah. I'm going to recognize Vice Chair Capito for one remaining question, and then I will recognize Senator Shaheen. Go ahead, Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Gibbons, you were either having your best day or your worst day because you hadn't gotten a question yet. So I wanted to ask a question about an NIH study through your institute that found higher mortality rates for patients on respiratory support in rural intermediate care units. This goes to the heart of what I talked about earlier. Obviously, I have a large rural population. What advice would you give, or what do you think can come out of this study in terms of helping rural intermediate care facilities be able to change the results of this study?
Oh, thank you, Senator. You bring out the important aspect of your earlier comment, in which we recognize that rural America and our systems need to focus in on where the burden and suffering is the greatest. Clearly, when it comes to intensive care units, there's actually a lower proportion per capita in rural communities, and we know that it is a challenge. We're hoping and we're testing strategies, many of which involve telehealth, in which we can ensure that the care is at the level where we can improve those rates of recovery in the context of rural communities. For example, one of the other elements of that challenge involves chronic pulmonary disease, in which we know that pulmonary rehabilitation can actually reduce hospitalization rates for those with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And we've tested that in rural settings and shown that it's effective in the context of where patients are in rural communities. Similarly, we have established cohort studies focused in on rural communities to understand the whole trajectory of the development of chronic lung disease and heart disease. Our rural initiative in Kentucky, Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, so that we really want to be where individuals are to understand their risks and improve their care. Including the use of a mobile CT scan to further understand those things. So.
Good. I was just talking with one of my West Virginia University doctors about a mobile unit for more to look more at heart. I just want to thank all of you. This has been it's just so informative and hopeful, and also my last comment would be to you, Dr. Bortognoli. 27 institutes. That's a lot to manage, not just physically manage, but there's so much interplay between what's going on. Anything, and as we look at a time of dollars shrinking or not, we got to be more efficient. So any efficiencies, and I'm not asking you to speak on this, any efficiencies that can be found across the 27 institutes, I think you're going to reap the results of that. And I know that's something that you and I talked about earlier. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Senator Shaheen. I haven't voted yet, so.
Senator Shaheen, you're recognized.
I have voted, so thank you for holding the hearing, and thank you all so much, not just for being here today, but for the work that you do every day. I really want to focus my questions on the area of substance misuse, and Dr. Volkov, you have been so helpful and willing to come to New Hampshire to see our challenges there. But while CDC data shows overdose deaths decreased somewhat last year for the first time since 2018, we still lost 107,000 Americans, 430 in New Hampshire. And overdose deaths continue to take a devastating toll on not just those affected, but their families, friends. Last year, we discussed the important work of the HEAL initiative And can you give us an update on the development of medications for treating or vaccinating individuals against substance use disorders?
That question, and I actually am keeping an eye on this problem that, yes, there was a 3% decrease on 2023, but if you look at certain areas, they are continuing to increase the mortality, and the numbers are unacceptable. So there are many strategies. One of them is how is it that we can provide better treatment for people that otherwise will die because of an overdose. And vaccines and monoclonal antibodies has been one of the targeted. We have started, actually, we completed a trial on phase 2 for the monoclonal antibody against methamphetamine. And I want to note that the number of people dying from methamphetamine has continued to increase. We are not seeing reductions, and we have no treatment whatsoever. Unfortunately, the outcome did not reach the one that was set up by the FDA. So the company is withdrawing, and unfortunately. We are in the stages of also started clinical trials with fentanyl monoclonal antibody. And there is in the last preclinical stages for a fentanyl vaccine. So we are advancing, and the HEAL funding has enabled us to accelerate that research. There are many challenges, but we have multiple potential treatments for which, if the results come forward, we will have better interventions for reversing overdoses and better interventions, not just for treating opioid use disorder, but we have no medications for stimulant use disorder, which, as I said, the mortality has continued to increase. So we need to continue to do this in order to be able to bring the treatments to people.
I appreciate that, and we are certainly seeing that in New Hampshire, that the number of cases of people overdosing on meth has gone up, and as you point out, there's no treatment. One of the challenges that we're seeing in New Hampshire is that so much of our funding and programs have been tied to specific drugs, and we need more flexibility in what those programs can do to address other drugs other than just opioids. Would you agree with that it would be helpful to see more flexibility in funding?
100%. And in fact, what the science is telling us is that the problem that we have in overdoses is polysubstance use. It's very rare to see someone dying with just one substance. Mm-hmm. It's also very rare to have a person that has a substance use disorder that only consumes one drug. So the strategy now, and genetically, you inherit genes that make you vulnerable for addiction in general. So the strategy now is how do we do interventions that are going to be beneficial for any type of addiction regardless. And certainly in terms of how we deploy care and how we fund it, there should not be categorical distinguish this or the other, because it's not the way that the cases are presenting themselves.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I hope as we're looking at the funding in the budget, we can look at that issue and try and ensure that we're not directing funding just at one substance. My other question has to do with diabetes, and Dr. Bertagnoli, I think I'm going to direct this to you, as I understand. Last year, I asked Dr. Tabak about beta cell and stem cell derived islet replacement therapies, cutting edge technologies. We're seeing companies, a new company in New Hampshire that's working on that. It has tremendous potential for curing, and I say that directly, curing diabetes. I have a granddaughter with type 1, so we know very directly the challenges. Can you talk about where NIH is and plans to address investments in diabetes-focused cell therapies?
Absolutely. This is a very exciting area. There's great hope. There's three wins we have here that's come out of the special diabetes program. The first is the first drug that can delay the onset of type 1 diabetes severe symptoms by almost 3 years, so that's a win. The second, you've already referred to, the cadaveric islet cell transplants, where we're finally starting to know how to protect these precious islets from destruction by the immune system. And so, where we're hoping, this is one of those things where you get first proof of concept, then you can really expand and do better. And then finally, there's also good technology in new artificial pancreas technology and a lot of so much better testing, insulin control. I just want to raise one issue, though, since I think we both really care about this disease. We've still got a long way to go with underserved people, minorities,
Absolutely.
very young people. We're getting some advances. We got to make sure everybody gets them.
I couldn't agree more with that. And Senator Collins and I co-chair the Diabetes Caucus. We have legislation. We're working with some of our other colleagues to not only cap the out-of-pocket costs of insulin until we get these cures, but also to cover uninsured who definitely are experiencing more of the negative effects of the disease. Yep. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Thank you to Director Bertagnoli and the entire panel we have today of Institute directors. We really appreciate your presence and your work. The record is going to stay open for 1 week for additional questions, and now the subcommittee will stand in recess.
Thank you.